Sin is real. Sin, S-I-N, is real. Sin is evil. Sin can exist in any institution. And we need to work hard as the Minnesota Senate to protect our young, vulnerable children's minds against these terrible, wicked, evil practices.
Isn't it amazing how people like this are elected into state office across the country?
And unfortunately, because all humans are subjected to potentially being corrupted by sin, we need to examine all institutions to prohibit such funds. There are practices out there that seek to groom and corrupt the minds of young children to engage in sexual perversion. And those wicked people manifest themselves in many different areas of our society. One of those areas that they have manifested themselves is in the areas of the arts.
So unfortunately, that was a state senator from Minnesota talking about sin and how evil and sinful he thinks queer people are, but specifically goes on to continue the ridiculous conspiracy theory at the end that somehow just by existing as a queer person, or dare I say, by schools teaching kids that queer people exist, is somehow equivalent to grooming children. And there are so many layers to this that need to be unpacked, but the core bit of it is fundamentally, right-wingers want the United States to be some sort of ridiculous theocracy with incredibly rigid roles for men and women. At the end of the day, they are ultimately just using what they say is Christianity as justification for their violent homophobia, misogyny, trans misogyny, and any other flavor of bigotry that they partake in. They just like to use the language of sin to scare people, to make everything seem like it this supernatural, like evil force against the world. When in reality, these people are just trying to impose their very narrow and hyper-specific religious beliefs on everybody. And this is obviously part of a larger campaign that Republicans are engaged in terms of trying to like demonize and villainize any type of queer folks that are around. But ultimately, what he is calling sinful is the very simple concept, I know this is going to be wild, that kids should be allowed to be themselves, and that kids, dare I say, should learn about other people that exist in the world. That right there is what these Republicans think is so terrifying. Because really, at the end of the day, what they are very afraid of is they're afraid of their kids eventually growing up to potentially be queer, which is something that is not under anybody's control. It just happens. But of course, Republicans don't want to live in that world. They want to live in a world where children are treated as property and have no agency of their own and are not recognized as their own people, instead of viewing themselves as being responsible to another person, that being their kid. They want to be the sole owners of their child. And that's very much demonstrated by the fact that Republicans across the country, despite being very against the idea that children are capable of understanding that queer people exist in the world, also at the same time are trying to loosen child labor laws and, in many states across the country, actively fight to keep in place laws that allow child marriage. Now, that may seem hypocritical, but the ultimate reality is that they think children are property. Their whole conception of marriage is a property relationship, and so is their conception of employment. So they don't see any problem with sending your kid off to work or sending them to marry some weird creep. They only see a problem with anything that suggests that children are their own people, that simply need a little bit extra care and guidance. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, it is just a property relationship that they want to have with children, which underlies all of this. And that's why they'll freak out and engage in all of this satanic panic nonsense. It's why they'll spread all these conspiracy theories about queer people grooming children. And that's not even to get into like the larger conspiracy theories that are connected to this, which are deeply anti-Semitic at their roots. No, it's just this over-the-top religious fundamentalism that unfortunately a lot of representatives, despite the United States officially being a secular country according to the Constitution, want the United States to be some sort of weird theocracy, governed by arguably the creepiest people on the planet.